Kansas State not only has to win on Tuesday night, but they have to prove a message in doing so.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rauh. You can find me on Twitter X at Christian S. Rauh. And thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Welcome back to my everydayers. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Locked On Kansas State. And before we get started, today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win on that first $5. So visit FanDuel.com today to get started. Well, we have a men's basketball game on tonight, and it's a doozy. It's a big one, folks. It's going to be at the T-Mobile Center in Kansas City, and there's a lot of things on the line, really, right off the bat. A lot of storylines into this one game, into a non-conference game that when you probably look at the schedule for the first time months ago, before the season even started, you probably wouldn't think that there'd be so much riding on this game, but there truly is. And I'm going to go back to saying exactly what I started off on this show to say. Not only does Kansas State have to beat the Drake Bulldogs tonight in the game, but they must do so in proving a message in doing so. They have to have a statement win against Drake tonight. And we're going to make sure we cover all that and how they can do so on today's episode. Kansas State heads to Kansas City's T-Mobile Center to take for the Wildcat Classic to take on the Drake Bulldogs, the undefeated Drake Bulldogs, might I add on that one. They are having a great season so far, first in the Mountain West Conference, and they are just doing a great job. 9-0, and some of those teams that they have defeated are not just like slacks. They are some really good basketball teams. They defeated the Miami Hurricanes 80-69. FAU defeated by 12 points, and they also took down Vanderbilt by 11. All those are some pretty top-notch schools, at least schools that are going to be battling for a chance to make it to the NCAA tournament. We find that Drake does that, and not only do they do it pretty good while doing it. 9-0, they're 1-0 in their conference, and they're getting started with hopefully a big game against Kansas State. That's what they hope, but we don't want to see that. We need to see a big bounce back from Kansas State in this one. And it's safe to say that all of this hype this past offseason and this huge NIL budget towards the roster, the team is not off to the start that we were looking for this season. I think it's very safe to say. And I think that when we search around social media and the message boards and talk to other Kansas State fans just back and forth, either in text message, Discord, whatever the case may be, it sounds like we're all on the same page with that. We all expected this team to be a lot better, at least stand out a lot better. And as of right now, that has not been the case. And we need to see them to jump back. The Wildcats currently sit at 6-3 with losses to Liberty, LSU, and St. John's. That St. John's loss was a devastating blow heading into this long 10-day break after how they started off so well and then kind of just crapped the bed towards the end of that game. But with only 2 non-conference games left, it is crucial to get on the right path and not only win this game against Drake, handing them their first loss, but prove a point while doing it. I'm going to push that again. They must make a statement win in this game tonight. This is only one of 2 non-conference games remaining. They also got Wichita State coming up before they start off Big 12 play against a tough Cincinnati team. Cincinnati's a really tough team. This conference is the best basketball conference in the nation. Don't let anybody fool you. You know, just because there's a team like Tennessee and Auburn sitting number 1 and 2, from top to bottom, the Big 12 is the best team, best conference in all of basketballs. But what do we need to know about Drake? Because this is the team that obviously Kansas State's going up against tonight, trying to find a way to get their first loss in the column. And first and foremost, I'll say this, the fact that they're playing away from Manhattan tonight, they're playing the Wildcat Classic at T-Mobile Center in Kansas City, might be a good thing because it has a little bit more feel to it. I think a little bit more urgency. You're kind of on the road, but you're not. You know, it's a home game, but is it? You know, there's a feeling to it. And you know, when I ask you, is it feel like a home game? Well, to Drake, it might be the same way as well. There are plenty of Kansas State area players on the Drake roster. For example, Tavion Banks, Kansas City, Missouri Jr. We have Cam Maniwu. He's a sophomore forward. and he's also from Kansas State. There's plenty of other players in the Missouri area. I believe in total there's about 6 Kansas City area kids that are on the Drake Bulldogs. That's insane. So they're going to feel like this is a home game for them. They're going to be hyped going into this game, having a chance to bring down a Power 4 school for the third time in their season, not just program history, their season. Already knocking down Vanderbilt and Miami, now trying to take down Kansas State in a home-like setting for half of their roster. I mean, that's a very big deal for Drake. And then, by the way, they'd also moved to 10-0 on the year. There's a lot of things riding on the line for Kansas State. How can they knock them down? How can they get back on the right path? The best way to do that is to prove a message. And they have the roster to do that. And they have plenty of time to figure out how they are going to do that, because they had 10 days off between the loss to St. John's and tonight's game. Looking at Drake's leaders on the team, Sturwitz, the guard, he's played 9 games so far. He's played in every single game. He's averaging over 36 minutes per game. And there's a good reason why he hardly leaves the court. He is their leader. He's almost averaging 18 points a game, 5 rebounds per game, and 6 assists. He's shooting almost 48% from the field and shoots over 30% from behind the arc. He is a stud, and he is going to be the guy that you have to pay attention to on this roster. There's no doubt about it. Junior 6'4" guard out of Liberty, Missouri. And again, this is something that you really got to pay attention to. In his last game, he only put up 10 points. He only played 22 minutes because it was a blowout. But to put it in perspective, Vanderbilt, in the last game against Vanderbilt, one of those big Power 4 schools, he played against an SEC school. They won 81-70. He put up 16 points in 40 minutes of play. He didn't leave the court. And he shot 35% from the field goal. Did not shoot any threes, but had 11 assists as well. So 16 points and 11 assists, a double-double against an SEC school. The Drake Bulldogs did that, their leading scorer. So look for him to be a huge piece. And if they're trying to go to 10-0, and what Kansas State must do, they got to stop him. I think that's pretty safe to say. They also got to score basketball points. They got to put points on the board. Yeah, and I know, for the record, I think if you got to score points to win the game, the most points at the end of the game wins. Shocking, right? But what I mean is that Drake is second in the nation in defense points per game, in points allowed. They are the second best team in all of college basketball when it comes to allowing points. Now, some of their games, they've scored 90-35 against some really low quality opponents, if you will, but they're still doing that and keeping that score low, keeping their points per game average low against teams like Miami and FAU and Vanderbilt. So this team knows how to play defense, and they can shoot the ball as well. They're a very good basketball team all around. This is not going to be a pushover game by any means for Kansas State. Doesn't mean it's not winnable. Doesn't mean they can't win this game, because they absolutely can win this game, and they have to do so and prove a message while doing it. A lot of things to take into this game, a lot of things to talk about. And we're going to continue here, as the game is only just hours away between Kansas State Wildcats and the Drake Bulldogs. But with that being said, we had a press conference from Coach Tang just on Monday, and he discussed a lot of important factors of what went on over that 10-day break, and what should they be working on, what should we be focusing on, and see if there's any improvements. Because not only is this game important to set the tone for the rest of the season, in the short term, it's important to make sure that they're ready for conference play that starts in just a few weeks. It doesn't start in 2025, folks. We're getting conference play before the Christmas break. So plenty to talk about here, and we're going to continue that on right here on Locked On Kansas State. Well, it's that time of the year again, folks. The college football playoffs are back. And with a newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the college football playoffs begin December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern, leading into our first matchup, the SMU Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. So don't miss the action. Watch the college football playoffs presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. And welcome on back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. Thank you for being every day, or if you are joining for the first time, or if you haven't done so yet, please hit the like, subscribe, or comment below. Join the conversation. I love chatting with all of the Kansas State Wildcats fans. Love having a good time with it. And if you're listening on audio form, please do me a favor and click 5 stars. Rate, review wherever you're listening to your favorite podcast. It definitely helps a lot, and it gets us in front of more eyes and ears. And hopefully more eyes and ears of Kansas State Wildcats fans. Well, we're talking about the Drake and Kansas State game happening tonight, the Wildcat Classic. That's going to be at the T-Mobile Center in Kansas City, Missouri. And with that being said, it's going to be a tough game. Kansas State has to have a statement win if they want to move forward and have a good feeling heading into Big 12 play. This is one of 2 non-conference games left on the schedule before they head and take on Cincinnati to start off conference play. But first, Coach Tang had a presser on Monday and talked about, what there was worked on over the long break in between games. And really, there's a lot of things to take from it. And first, before I get to his actual thoughts and what he said, what they worked on, these 10 days, is it a blessing or is it a distraction? That's a really big question. It's a really crucial question. And I wonder if it actually is a little bit of both. Obviously, the dismissal or the fact that he decided to leave, whatever the case may be, of Achor leaving the program, that happened in these last 10 days. Regardless if you think that's a distraction or not, that's on the mind of the team. This is a small team. The roster is not a size of a football team. Even if he was leaving the football team, it would still be on the mind of the football players. But when you're in a small community, small roster size of the basketball squad, this obviously has a decent impact on just your overall mentality going into the next game. It's not like Achor only rode the bench. He did play some minutes. He played 5 minutes in the St. John's game. He did play more in the past, but obviously it was a mutual decision for them to leave the team, and they're moving forward. But there's no doubt in my mind that there hasn't been some discussions or some sort of distraction, if you will, in these last 10 days. There's also been some conversations about the possibility of Doug McDaniel leaving the team. That sounds like to be all fabricated, or at least in the case, not true. And it was just a social media discussion. Who knows how actually true that was, but Jerome Tang did go out on his press conference and say something interesting and say that him and Doug have a good relationship. It's not a great relationship, but they have a good relationship. Not really sure what to take from that, but all I know is it sounds like Doug McDaniel is going to continue to be a Wildcat heading into this game against Drake and hopefully for the rest of the season, because they absolutely need him if they're going to make any kind of stretch to hopefully make the NCAA tournament and not miss it for the second year in a row once it comes March. And what I mean, is it a blessing or a distraction? Well, I kind of talked about the possible distractions, but is it a blessing? And what I mean by that is in the game before they hit this 10-day stretch of off, right? They played against St. John's. They lost that game, but they had probably arguably their best half of basketball. That first half they played against St. John's was probably the best half of basketball they played all season long, especially against a top quality opponent. But that second half was dreadful. It was probably the flip side, the worst half of basketball they played all season long. That second half of basketball, that worst half, is the last half that you talked about. That last half that you have in the back of your mind heading into this 10 days while you wait for the Wildcat Classic. That could be a blessing in disguise, because that could mean that they're actually focusing on some things that happened during that terrible second half and how they can make those adjustments, make sure that never happens again. So hopefully the worst part of basketball, the worst part of their season has already happened, and they had a plethora of time, a vast amount of time to figure it out with this 10-day stretch here as we are waiting for them to play again. We're all going to find out when the game begins, when tip-off begins against Drake. Did they figure out these pieces? Did they get the right pieces taken care of? But hopefully it's in this case of it was a blessing these 10 days, not a distraction with some of these other things that were going down that we discussed on this show here on Locked On Kansas State. I'm hoping that this is the way that they took it. They found out that St. John's game, the second half, was just a terrible second half. They obviously knew that they could have beat that team because in the first half, they were doing everything right. They looked like a team that we all hoped and loved that would be the team that we would see from minute 1 to the final minute, hopefully ending in a national championship, right? But that second half turned it around and it showed that, hey, maybe there's a lot of more problems with this team than we expected moving into this season. Hopefully they get them fixed. I don't think you can get every single problem fixed with this squad in 10 days, but hopefully it's enough to gain momentum and make progress heading into the Big 12 play that starts in just 2 games. Jerome Tang, on what he said he emphasized during the 10-game layoff in the middle of the season, he talked about 3 things. And one of them was blatantly missing that I've noticed across social media and message boards that people are getting kind of upset about, that he didn't discuss this. But I'm going to talk about the 3 that he talked about first. He discussed transition defense. I agree that definitely was something that they need to work on so far this season. Rebounding and buy-in. First, rebounding has been dreadful. They've lost the rebound game in multiple times. They're having a hard time crashing the boards. They're just not doing a good job overall in that category. I agree that place needs to be focused on. And although he put that second in his conversation of what was emphasized during the 10-day layoff, I think that needs to be number 1 in the priority, their rebounding. Because not only does that change the entire landscape of the game, it adds second chance points. It does so many things for your team. It keeps the pace with Kansas State heading into, whatever game you're playing. Rebounding is like one of the secret metrics in winning basketball games. And if you're a basketball fan, you're listening to this show, I'm pretty sure I don't have to tell you that. The interesting one here was buy-in. And this is where I kind of lean back to, was it a blessing? Was it a distraction? Because if you're talking about buy-in, immediately my mind goes to the issues that happened with Rauh, the rumors on social media about what happened with Doug McDaniel. Obviously, again, the McDaniel stuff doesn't seem to be true, but it makes you think, right? And then you see guys that are just not performing to the standard that they need to so far this season. Hawkins being one of the guys that you brought in over the portal. You put a lot of money in an NIL, hasn't stepped up the way he wants. So he's even came on record after a game apologizing to fans because he knows he's not living up to his expectations. Where's the buy-in? What does he mean by that? Does it mean just listening to the coaches and following through and making sure that, what they're telling you to do is the right process, running the right plays, running hard in practice? Is it, just pushing that little extra ounce of energy before you get subbed out? What is buy-in? And I think that's all of it, actually. I think all of what I mentioned is buy-in. Whatever role is needed for you on this team, whether it's the superstar, the role player, or bringing off valuable minutes off the bench, buying into that concept is exactly what Jerome Tang and his coaching staff is looking for from the remaining players on this roster. And the fact that they're still working on this buy-in process, there's no doubt about it's concerning when you're only 2 games away from playing in the conference play against the toughest conference in all of college basketball. But it shows that they're aware that it is a problem, it is an issue, and it needs to be addressed before they get into the toughest stretch of their schedule. And hopefully that's a good thing. Hopefully we will see some big changes right off the bat with this Drake game. Hopefully that happens. The offense was not mentioned, though, in these topics that were emphasized by Coach Tang. And I saw on social media, I saw on message boards and things like that, that was a huge concern. Why wasn't the offense being mentioned? The offense has been dreadful. Well, I think that comments, right, of saying the offense has been dreadful is sort of a little bit of a recency bias. And I'm going to take it back to that second half in St. John's where they were just dreadful. But I sure, the offense can get better, but they're averaging over 80 points per game so far this season. And they do have 3 losses. There's no doubt about it that this offense isn't perfect. But when you're looking at the transition defense, the rebounding, buy-in, I don't think offense should be on the top of the list. Now, you can put buy-in wherever you want. If you don't think buy-in is a spot that needs to be there, Coach obviously thought that was something that needed to be put there, and he even enough to be emphasized to talk to the media about it. But the fact he didn't bring up offense, I don't think should be a huge concern. Should it be at the top of the list? I think Tang hit the needs of the focuses right on the head. And if anything, I'd add limiting turnovers to that list as well, because that's been a problem. But when you talk about rebounding, transition defense, and I think limiting turnovers, I think that's just an obvious, right? You got to be smarter with the basketball. Things that you can work on in practice with energy, talking about transition defense, hustling, right? Rebounding, being aggressive at the boards. Those are huge things you can work on. Buy-in, pushing the culture, pushing things, starting new, expectations. Doing that in that 10-day period, that's huge things. So I'm great. I love what Coach Tang brought up here. And I think that those things that he emphasized during this 10-day break, we might see a brand new Kansas State team. Hopefully. I hope I'm right. I hope I'm not wrong in this concept, and I hope that they didn't take a step backwards heading into this Drake game. How does buy-in happen, and what does need to get accomplished before conference play? I kind of mentioned that before, how buy-in works, and how can they get this to be accomplished before conference play? Well, against Drake and against Wichita State coming up, they got to prove that they have trust in not only Coach Tang and their coaching staff, but the rest of their players around them. And we're going to talk about a couple players that must step up in just a moment. But those key players, those star players on this team, have to find a better way on how they play with each other, not just by each other's side. And that's going to be a huge difference for the rest of the season for this Kansas State Wildcats team. So what players need to step up on Tuesday night? And I'm going to give you also my prediction and where I think we sit heading into the Wildcat Classic. We'll talk about that while we wrap up the show here on Locked On Kansas State. But first, get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel's America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. NFL playoffs are getting very close, folks. These games mean a lot, and that means that you only have just a few more weeks to get those good parlays, get those good straight bets in, money lines, whatever you want to do for the NFL. FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your same bets. That is my favorite part of this app, by the way. No need to bounce back and forth to different sports sites. You can see it all in one place. Focus on the bets of your hard-earned cash. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment count with FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. And welcome on back to Locked On Kansas State as we wrap up this episode. This preview show, getting ready for Drake and Kansas State in the Wildcat Classic in Kansas City, Missouri at the T-Mobile Center. It's going to be a great game. Really excited to watch this one. And we're going to have you covered, ready to go when this game is finished as well. We're going to have plenty to talk about. It is at 7 o'clock local time tip-off at the T-Mobile. There's still tickets available, by the way, if you're thinking and trying to make that quick little drive over there. So check it out for sure. I think it should be a really good basketball game. And the more purple in the crowd, the better. So who needs to step up for Kansas State? Who really needs to make that step up when it comes to, making a difference in winning this basketball game? Well, I think 3 players right off the bat come to mind. And I'm going to start off with what I think is an obvious one. And some of it has to do with some of the expectations that we've seen so far this season. Some of the stuff's going to go with what happened over the 10-day period. And some is just going to be who's supposed to be the leader on this squad. And I'm going to start off with Coleman Hawkins. I think Coleman Hawkins must step up. The 6'10 senior guard has to step up. He hasn't had the best overall play so far as with Kansas State since he's been here. Doesn't mean he can't do that. Coach Tang has liked the way he played. Now, I don't think when I talk about Coleman Hawkins needs to step up, I don't think he has to be the leading scorer on your team to step up. I think he just needs to be the leader on that court when he's out there. And although he's only played, 32 minutes, 33 minutes, I think he played 36 against Liberty. I'd like to see him play a little bit more consistently. I like to keep that 36 minutes up there, only for him to leave just to take a quick break and come back in. I'd love to see him play 36 minutes tonight if the game's close. I'd love for that to happen. With that being said, I'm shooting for my goal for Coleman Hawkins is not to lead the team in scoring. If he does, that's great. But I want to see a double-double out of him. Hopefully with points and rebounds, that'd be great. Hopefully maybe even 3 or 4, maybe even 5 assists as well. That'd be great. That's what we need from him. And that's a huge step forward if that happens. I'm going to go with the guy that was rumored to be possibly leaving this team. And thank God that's not the case. Doug McDaniel. He needs to step up as well. And I say him right after Hawkins because I think the two of them need to get on the same page a little bit better. And when I talked about in the last segment how they're playing with each other, like side by side, but not as a group, they need to do a better job playing as a team, as a unit together. He's had some, obviously there's been some conversations about him coming off the bench or him starting. There's been some, who knows what's going on. We've only seen him play about 30 minutes of gameplay. I'd also like to see him bounce up a little bit, maybe to 33, 34 minutes if the game is close, because I think having him on the court is huge. In the last game against St. John's, only played 29 minutes, had 9 points, 2 rebounds, no assists. That was a big thing. Need to get him more in the assist category. Hopefully him working better in tandem with Hawkins can get that done. And then finally, I'm going to go with a guy who I think is also very important, and somebody that we saw in the first half of the St. John's game that was probably the best shooter on the team and has been the best shooter for quite some time. And that's Brennan Hawson. I think he has to be absolutely lights out against Drake to prove a message, to make that statement win. When I talk about not only winning, but making that statement win, Hawson's the guy that I think about that can really make that step going. He shot 60% from behind the arc against St. John's. He was absolutely lights out, especially in that second half. Scored 27 points in that game in 37 minutes, 4 rebounds, and overall shot 53% from the field. He was a very good basketball player overall in that one. He's been in double digits in almost every single game this season, and it might even be every single game. No, all but two. All but two. The only games that he didn't do it was LSU and in the game after that. But regardless, he has a season high of 27 points against St. John's. Hopefully he can build off that. And not only that 10-day break, maybe he can push a little fine tuning. And not only do we see it in the first half, we see it in a full 40-minute game. That's a huge concept, folks. A huge 40-minute game. So can they win? Can they beat Drake? Well, right now, the odds really like him. The analytics really like him. Our friends at FanDuel, as of right now, have Drake as the underdog. Actually, Kansas State's a 1.5-point favorite. It's basically a pick 'em, if you will. But I think Kansas State is going to win this basketball game if we get these players to step up. If they live to that buy-in, they believe in that buy-in that Coach Tang was talking about for almost 2 weeks of an off time. And obviously, in the back of their head, they know what they can perform. They saw that first half against St. John's, against a very good St. John's basketball team, and what they can do if they don't live up to those expectations in that second half. That their last 40 minutes of basketball shows a tale of two halves, shows a tale of what each side of their basketball season could be. Could they be a fantastic basketball team that competes for the top of the Big 12? And yes, I said it. They can if they play like they do every single half, like they did in the first half against St. John's. Or are they going to battle for the bottom of the Big 12 and maybe get lucky to make the NIT if they compete like they did in the second half of that St. John's game? That's where we're at right now. That's where we're at. We're either at the pinnacle of the Big 12 or the basement of the Big 12. And we all saw that in one game against St. John's. What team's going to show up on Tuesday night against Drake? I'm hoping it's that first half team and then some, based on what they worked on in this 10-day period. I'm going to say Kansas State wins the game. I'm going to go, it's going to be a little low scoring in my opinion. I think they're going to win 74-65. That's where I'm going. 74-65. It's going to stay below 80 points, even though Kansas State's averaging over 80 points per game. We give a little bit of nod to Drake there on their defensive play. But 74-65 is going to be my prediction at Kansas State winning this basketball game. Hopefully I'm right. And we'll talk about that more once the game is over. But until then, please like the video. Please subscribe. Enjoy the game tonight. Come on back to Locked On Kansas State when they're done. But until then, this has been Locked On Kansas State.